call for public comment
Okay.
first.
Do we need to do a roll call again? All right, here we go. We're going to reconvene the imported water meeting. We will need to do another roll call. Marisol,
Chair Miller,
here.
Vice Chair Medaffer, Vice Chair Medaffer, Vice Chair Myers,
Present.
Directors Castañeda,
Here.
Croucher, Croucher,
I don't see him.
I just texted him, but no, we just can't. He'll show up.
should I keep going? Fong Sakai,
Present.
Heidemann,
Here.
Hogan,
Present.
Katz, Paul,
Present.
Querum, Scalzetti,
Here.
Serrano,
Here.
and Steiner. Here. Chair, you have a quorum of the committee.
Okay. We don't have any additions to the agenda. At this time, I'm going to ask if there's anybody who would like to speak on items on the agenda. If so, come forward. I know we've got some special speakers, but they'll come up later. Marisol, do we have anybody online?
If there are public speakers in the Zoom waiting room, please raise your hand through the Zoom app or press star 9 if you are listening by phone. Chair, looks like we have one.
You have one caller?
Yes.
Proceed.
Okay. Public speaker Kathy Wagner, you have 3 minutes to make your comments, and you can begin now.
Katie, are you out there? You might be muted, Katie.
Panelist?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
She needs to unmute,
Oh.
or you need to unmute her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
There you go. We can hear you.
Great, thank you so much. This is Katie Wagner, Sierra Club, California. I'd like to address 2 things today. First, the Delta Conveyance Project is a wildly unpopular project, and there's a reason it hasn't been put to a vote to the public since 1982. Climate change has and will continue to make imported water supply wildly unpredictable. The big gulp, little sip theory will be impacted by regulations on water uses that will either render the Delta Tunnel a stranded asset, or lobbyists will push for more flows that will cause further ecological damage and incur lawsuits. Instead, save ratepayer dollars by voting against the funding the project in the first place, and improve levees in the Bay Delta to improve water reliability, and invest in sustainable resources closer to home and improved efficiency. I'd also want to commend the San Diego delegation to Met today for their hard work over the years. They have always had the best feedback. Director Smith has had some of the boldest comments on spending wisely and budget, while Director Goldberg looks at the big picture and careful planning, especially with the IRP. Director Miller has provided critical feedback on the freshwater pathway, which is where most of the Delta advocates can find common ground. Director Fong Sakai is always getting down to the bottom line and speaking up for ratepayers, which is really critical in this era of unaffordability. The delegation as a whole has had some of the best comments on the budget process, the business model, the IRP, and the Delta levees and islands. I can't imagine how much money they've saved ratepayers, not only in San Diego, but throughout the district. And I want to thank Chair Serrano and the rest of the board and staff that have contributed to their vision and their efforts over the years. So thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Is there any others?
No, I see no other speakers.
Okay, thanks, Marisol. Okay, under my director's comments, I'd like to thank Directors Medaffer and Heidemann, along with their general manager and staff, for representing the Water Authority at last month's Colorado River Symposium in Santa Fe. The biennial symposium organized by the Water Education Foundation brought together stakeholders from across the basin with this year's theme of Bridging Divides for a Resilient Future. I want to share that the Water Resources Specialist Dennis Davis from our Colorado River program spoke at the symposium along with his class as part of his participation in the Water Education Foundation 2024 Colorado River Water Leaders Program. Selection in the program is competitive and teams young water professionals with members to develop a next generation of water leaders. Congratulations to Dennis for completing the program and representing the Water Authority. Another item pertaining to the Colorado River, the state held a groundbreaking last week for the expansion of the largest project at the Salton Sea, the Species Conservation Habitat Project. The expansion is being funded through the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. The Water Authority continues to be supportive of the state's phased approach to restoration through the Salton Sea Management Program, and it's good to see the new federal investment is happening now at the sea. Switching to other important water supply, today we have special guests from Sacramento joining us. First, we'll hear from the State Water Contractor's General Manager to give us an update on the State Water Project. Then we will have the General Manager from the Delta Conveyance Project Design and Constructive Authority and DWR representatives to share the most recent information on the Delta Tunnel, including the cost-benefit analysis on project. This is a timely update because MET anticipates being asked to fund an additional $142 million to complete the, not complete, but to be part of completing the project's planning process later this year. Do any of my vice chairs have anything they'd like to say? Okay, I'm going to turn this over to our General Manager.
All right, thank you, Chair Miller. Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to our three distinguished speakers. Jennifer, Graham, and Carrie, I'll get into their bios in a little bit, but I just wanted to tee this up a little bit just in terms of how we got to this place where we have the three of them. I think there might be a fourth online. All right, Dave Sunding's online as well. How they got here. You know, we haven't had much information in terms of this project on our normal agenda, and so we wanted to provide some information in anticipation of what Director Miller described in terms of the vote at Metropolitan here in a month or so. This group, Jennifer, Graham, and Carrie, and Dave Sunding, have been going to different water agencies, delivering similar presentations. Mina Westford, who couldn't make it here today, helped set this up and advised that this might be a good informational and educational session for this board. So that's why we're here. Provide your delegates to the Met Board input after this as they prepare for an important vote. So I think that we're going to start off with you, Jennifer. Let me give Jennifer's quick bio, and I'll actually just go through the whole list here so that we can kind of have a seamless presentation. Jennifer's the GM of the State Water Project Contractors. It's a nonprofit association of public water agencies that contract with the Department of Water Resources, DWR, to receive water from the State Water Project, which provides water to 27 million Californians and 750,000 acres of farmland. She is a UC Davis alum with a bachelor's degree in environmental biology and conservation. She has 20 years of experience in Delta water management. And Jennifer, of course, is a champion of collaboration and science-based decision-making. She's going to be up first. After her is going to be Graham Bradner, Executive Director of the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority. He has 25 years of experience in the evaluation, design, and construction of large-scale water supply infrastructure projects in Northern California. Graham is a professional geologist in the state of California, a certified engineering geologist, a certified hydrologist, a project management professional. He knows what he's talking about today, ladies and gentlemen. Carrie Buckman is DWR's Environmental Program Manager for Delta Conveyance, responsible for environmental planning and permitting for a potential single tunnel conveyance project. Prior to working for DWR, Carrie was in the private sector for 21 years working on feasibility planning studies. And last but not least, an old friend to the San Diego County Water Authority, Dr. David Sunding. He is the Professor Emeritus of the Thomas J. Graff Professor in the College of Natural Resources at UC Berkeley, where he has been a faculty member since 1992. He has twice served as the chair of that department and co-founded the Berkeley Water Center. As far as his relationship with San Diego, Dave Sunding was one of the chief negotiators on our side of the table for the water transfer agreement with the Imperial Valley. So he's come full circle back to this boardroom. Welcome, everyone. Jennifer, please take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here today. We're very happy to be here. My job is going to be to give an overview of the State Water Project, so there's some context for Carrie, Graham, and Dave to talk about the Delta Conveyance Project. So I'm going to try to go pretty quickly. Please feel free to stop with questions. A lot of data in here, but I want to make as much time for questions and dialogue and discussion on the topic at hand. So just to be clear, state water contractors, Metropolitan Water District, obviously you're familiar with, is the largest state water contractor at about 46%. But the group of state water contractors are 29 public water agencies who contract with the state to participate in receiving state water project supplies. They pay and receive water per the contracts. Most of them are wholesalers. Some act as wholesalers and retailers. As your general manager mentioned, we serve water to 27 million people, and that's actually 1 in 12 Americans, and 750,000 acres of farmland. Our mission is really to advocate for science-based, sensible policies related to State Water Project for sustainable and cost-effective management of the State Water Project. And really, that is our bottom line. It's environmental sustainability and cost per acre foot. This is a cartoon graphic at the State Water Project, and what I like to point out, it's the largest state-owned water utility in the world. It's more than the Delta, it's more than Oroville. I mean, those are the things we hear most about, but it's really an engineering marvel to collect and move water throughout the state, and has really been the driver on the economic development of the state. And I'll talk about in a moment, what that means in today's economy for the state. In terms of how we deliver, where we deliver, this is a map showing the service area of the State Water Project. Contractually, the State Water Project is about 75% urban and 25% ag, but with different transfers and exchanges, it works out to about 55 urban, 45 agriculture. And you can see the purple in urban, Southern California, for example, or orange just north of here in the valley is more ag, and that we also deliver in areas such as the North Bay area of the San Francisco Bay, South Bay of San Francisco Bay, and pretty much all along the coast, beginning in San Luis County. I want to point out, San Diego County Water Authority has been really at the forefront of regional self-reliance, and you deserve a lot of kudos for the planning that you've done, even before it became kind of a state mandate here. What I just want to show, though, is the other state water contractors are doing similar work. You can see that over time they've been reducing the proportion of their portfolio that is coming from the Delta. So even as demand throughout the urban regions and agricultural regions increases, folks are making investments in regional self-reliance. And just also want to just point out, you have been one of the first and foremost of making that happen. And it is important, and even as state water contractors continue to make investments in the State Water Project, they're also making investments in their local and regional self-reliance. The State Water Project, however, is a huge volume of water. So relevant to this particular region, wanted to point out that annually, on average, the State Water Project delivers the equivalent to 3 full Diamond Valley Lakes or 48 Carlsbad desal plants. It's just a huge amount of water. It's almost incomprehensible when we think about the amount of water. And I'll show a histograph of kind of what the deliveries look like, because of course it's also variable, and that's one of the differences between the State Water Project and some other options for completing your portfolio. However, the State Water Project is very clean. I'll talk about water quality in a moment. It really does complement a lot of the other investments that state water contractors make. For example, the State Water Project can be used to refill reservoirs. It supports groundwater recharge. It supports recycled water and water quality management in different ways throughout the state, but it does play that role throughout our service area. So this is a regional breakdown of State Water Project, and I highlighted Southern California for you here today. but it's pretty similar across our service area, where about 30% of the water in the service area comes from the State Water Project. So it's a pretty significant component of each of our contractors' portfolios. Within this area, in the metropolitan service area, similarly, State Water Project's about 30% of the total supply, with 20% coming from Colorado and 50% from local supplies. And as you all know, that varies year to year, but that's the long-term average. This is showing deliveries to Metropolitan over the course, I think this starts in 1972. But what I want to point out is that even in the major drought periods, and I highlighted in green the bars representing the 14-15 drought and the more recent drought, the State Water Project is still delivering about 600,000 acre-feet of water to the region. So it is highly variable, you can see in this bar chart, and again, that's different than maybe some other alternative supplies, but it is a significant volume of water that is not easily replaceable for many of our contractors. One thing I wanted to point out today, too, is in the Delta, what we're finding, and this figure comes from the Department of Water Resources every 2 years does what's called a delivery capability report, which is meant to inform its contractors about what they should expect to receive from the State Water Project given regulatory requirements, climate, et cetera. And this year was the first year that the department really looked at some extreme climate modeling. And what this is showing is a 95 level of concern, all the way down to, 50% level of concern. And you can see that even at a 95% level of concern, which is a very extreme climate scenario, the Delta isn't really drying. We're losing about under 2% of the precipitation in the system. But what we're seeing is rather a shift to a shrinking wintertime. So rather than having winter from December to May, we're going to have it now February to April. And instead of it coming in the form of snow, it's going to come in the form of rain. So the total precip in our system isn't necessarily shifting significantly, it's how it's coming. And that's what we're trying to respond to on the State Water Project. The tunnel is one mechanism to respond to that, but that's really that's the driver here for maintaining the State Water Project. Within metropolitan service area, water quality management is very critical. I think everyone's aware the Colorado River has more salt and TDS than other places, and the State Water Project is really critical to blending with Colorado River water to meet that 500 milligrams a liter per liter goal that Metropolitan has set. So that's specific to this area. There's other agencies that use the Delta water to help with seawater intrusion. There's other agencies that are using it to address PFAS and other issues. And it's also important because it is so clean that it is easy to recycle as well. So it definitely can support, within the Southern California region, a lot of other ways of securing water supply. And this is just a cartoon graphic of that. And then throughout the service area, the State Water Project service area, we have water banking. We do have recycled water. There's a significant amount of groundwater storage and recharge and banking. And then, of course, local surface water storage. And Diamond Valley, for example, is one major facility available to Southern California. Beyond this region, there's a lot of public benefits to the State Water Project, and I just want to point out this is something we're getting a lot more fine-tuned around because we're recognizing that the beneficiaries of the State Water Project are much greater than the water ratepayers. We have significant clean energy contributions to the entire state's grid. We are supporting the electrification. We have millions of visitor days per year within the reservoirs located throughout the state. We are the tallest dam in the United States, and that actually provides significant flood protection for Northern California, a good amount of environmental protection that we do beyond our mitigation requirements, food security, which is difficult to quantify but is very real in the state and nation, very important to support California ag. And there's broad state-wide economic benefits. This slide comes from the DWR's recent analysis of the economic benefits of the State Water Project. And basically, if the State Water Project service area, all of it, not just Southern California, but the entirety of it, were its own country, it would be the 8th largest economy in the world. And that movement of the water is, of course, a very critical piece of making that economy run. In terms of costs of the State Water Project, these are in 2021 dollars, and this shows just by different regions the costs of water across the x-axis here, with Central Coast being the more expensive State Water Project water, with Southern California and the dark blue underneath that. Just looking at some of the various alternative supplies that you might look at. Again, you know, there's different values for different types of water, and you are all very familiar with that. Some are more certain all the time, some are more variable, some are more expensive. Every water agency has to piece together their own portfolio. So from my perspective, there isn't just State Water Project or just something else. It's how do all these things fit together in an affordable, sustainable way for each agency. And that's what each of the boards have to piece together, especially as climate change comes roaring at us so quickly. But I think for most of our agencies, the State Water Project really is one of the most affordable supplies, which is why there continues to be investment in it. The other thing to consider for all of our agencies is that about 3/4 of all disadvantaged communities live in our service area. So you are all very familiar with affordability. It is becoming absolutely forefront for all of our agencies, and in part it's trying to figure out how to piece that portfolio together in a way that's affordable, and this is definitely front and center for all of our state water contractors. I just want to point out we are trying to address affordability at the same time we are trying to achieve climate resilience. It's very challenging, as you know. We are looking in terms of increasing supply reliability. How do we adjust our operational rules to be more climate responsive? The Delta Conveyance Project is part of that, but we're also looking at conveyance repairs, the canals that help deliver water throughout the state, increasing storage capacity. Some of the contractors are looking at Sites Reservoir and other Prop 1 storage projects, and there's I think a pretty significant renewed look at underground storage now. And how do you piece all this together in an affordable way? In terms of the cost side of the equation, we're really starting to look at what are the appropriate statewide investments for public benefits. As I mentioned, there's a number of them: recreation, flood control, energy development. All of these things are not water ratepayer benefits. So how do we articulate that and cost share in a way that makes the water ratepayer affordability work? I think DWR has done an excellent job in becoming more efficient in planning and permitting, and you'll see when you meet Graham what I mean by that, but not just on the tunnel, but across the State Water Project. And then the energy costs are a fast rising cost for us, and that's something that we're really wanting to make sure is not the full burden of the state water contractors. So lastly, I just want to end and pass it on to the tunnel discussion. You know, I found these quotes, and they're maybe a little bit cheesy, I suppose, but I really liked them, so I put them on my last slide. You know, we all do better when we all do better, and really thinking about how, as a state, do we work together to, you know, promote the continued economic growth in a sustainable way. And the State Water Project really is nearly an irreplaceable volume of water, high-quality water. It's a significant amount. For most agencies, it really is the most affordable supply they have. It doesn't mean it should be the only one, but it is part of that base in creating the affordability. It helps support investments in local projects. It's addressing sea level intrusion, groundwater basin management, and a lot of our agencies have groundwater basins they're managing either under SGMA or even adjudicated basins with water quality issues, and trying to, you know, conjunctively manage those. And then as it relates to Colorado River, I think we have an untapped opportunity to look at how we might shore up Delta supplies in a way that can take some pressure off the Colorado River, which, as we all know, is in fact drying. So how do we bring all of this together in a way that really creates resiliency, not just for Southern California, but really the broader West? So I'll end with my quote of sometimes only the realists are the dreamers. And with that, I don't know if you want to take questions now or pass to Graham. So.
I think if everybody agrees, we'll take questions when all three of you have spoken. I think we all agree that State Water Project's very important to all of California, so we're on your side there.
Thank you so much for having us. It's really great to be here with you in person and get to talk about the project a bit. So I am Carrie Buckman from DWR. I am leading the planning and permitting. So I'm going to kick off our discussion by talking a little bit about why DWR is working on this project, why we're here. And then Graham and Dr. Sunding are going to talk more about the cost estimate and the benefit cost analysis. So this is really following up on what Jennifer presented, the idea that that we know that the climate is changing. I think this is something we've been planning for some time, but really I'd say in the past few years, we've seen a lot of the things that we were planning for as hypotheticals becoming not hypotheticals. So with that in mind, we really need to plan for this and not respond as it happens. So there's quite a bit of variability in scenarios about what could happen with climate change, but the median scenarios are really a small increase in overall projected annual runoff, but it's on a very different pattern, and those patterns are shifting across all of the different scenarios. We are expecting to see more precipitation falling as rain instead of snow, more extreme drought and flood cycles, and I think we've even seen that pretty clearly over the past few years, and intense precipitation events within dry stretches. We call those flashier precipitation patterns, and for example, a couple of years ago, we had this very big storm event in October in 2021 in Sacramento where we got like 5 inches of rain in 24 hours. We expect more of that. And these precipitation patterns aren't able to be really as well managed in our existing system. So as we move forward without as much snowmelt, right now in the winter our stream flow is pretty stable because of rainfall, and in the spring it's stable because of snowmelt. And as we move forward, that's really going to shift. As we see more precipitation coming through as stream flow in the winter because of that increased rainfall, it's pretty hard to capture it. We can't really capture it in storage because we have flood protection requirements where we have to save space for those flood events. And in the Delta, we have limitations because of water quality and environmental restrictions, as well as physical restrictions. We just can't capture it. So having another way to do this would really help. If we had these 2 new intakes in the North Delta, they would be able to capture high flows when they're available and help us address this declining baseline that we're facing with the State Water Project. This is also exacerbated by sea level rise. With sea level rise, we need to be releasing more water from storage to keep the salinity out of the Delta area. And so that sort of worsens this overall condition. And we also are very concerned about earthquake risk. So having an alternate point of diversion in case earthquakes damage the fragile Delta levees is also very important to us. So last year is a really good example of how the Delta Conveyance Project could help. Last year, I think people probably followed that there were some pretty major steelhead issues near the South Delta diversion facilities for the State Water Project. We had more regulatory restrictions last year than in any other recent year. Steelhead typically do not affect our diversions. They're usually not a controlling requirement. But last year they were collected near the South Delta facilities. And if we had had an alternate point of diversion that was in a different location in the Delta that had different kinds of conditions, we would have been able to capture quite a bit more water because last year was on the wetter side. So if we had had the Delta Conveyance Project, we would have been able to capture an additional 941,000 acre-feet of water, which is enough water for over 9.8 million people for a year, or nearly 3.3 million households for a year. And later in the presentation, Dr. Sunding is going to talk about the benefits of the project and how they're monetized. And I wanted to flag that this kind of benefit is not fully captured in the analysis because it is situational. This was a year where we did not predict those steelhead issues. They were something that was sort of a one-time condition. But there are one-time conditions on a regular basis that are hard to predict, and having this flexibility is so important to effectively managing the State Water Project. I also wanted to highlight the planning schedule. So as the lead of the planning and permitting, this is sort of where I sit. So right now we are working, we finished last year the environmental impact report in December. That was a really big milestone for us, but it was just a milestone. There's still a lot of work to do. So we are moving forward now to work on our Endangered Species Act and California Endangered Species Act compliance, which we are working towards finishing at the end of this year. We have also started a water rights process to change our point of diversion. We are not looking to have a new water right or an expanded water right, but add 2 new points of diversion for where we can divert that water. And then we will also be working to demonstrate consistency with the Delta Plan. And so these activities are shown, the key permit activities through the end of 2026. For those who are at Aqua, you might have heard the governor talk about his very firm commitment to having this done at the end of his term. So we are working very hard to meet that deadline, and he's very committed to helping us. And I know that there's going to be a request from Metropolitan to consider planning funds to keep this project moving. And I just wanted to highlight that those planning funds are to continue this planning schedule. We are not yet at a point where we're looking at a decision on the project. There's quite a bit more information to be collected over the next few years before that decision is being made in 2027. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Graham.
Oh, I don't know if I want to mess with that. Yeah. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So I'm going to touch on two topics here with you this afternoon. First, the updated cost estimate that we've prepared for the project. As Carrie mentioned, the Department of Water Resources selected the Bethany Reservoir alignment as the Delta Conveyance project back in December of 2023. And so one of the main reasons we prepared this updated cost estimate was to true up the costs and understand where we see real opportunities for value engineering and cost management in the future. And then also to feed the economic feasibility analysis that you're going to hear from Dr. Sunding following my presentation. Then I would also like to cover a little bit about some of the innovation work we're doing. So this is kind of a preview of the impacts of value engineering in terms of a cost management strategy. So as we were working on this cost estimate, we also simultaneously started looking for opportunities to reduce costs, reduce schedule, better manage impacts. And so I want to also highlight some of those key findings for you as well. So first, the project, it's a 6,000 cubic foot per second project. That would include 2 new intakes on the main stem of the Sacramento River on the North Delta. There would be a conveyance tunnel 45 miles long to connect those new intakes in the north down to the existing State Water Project infrastructure located in the South Delta. Part of the project would include a new pumping plant to lift the water out of the tunnel, deliver it directly to the existing Bethany Reservoir. So that's an existing wide spot in the California Aqueduct. And the project would independently deliver these flows into that reservoir as redundancy to the existing Banks pumping plant, which provides the lift down in the South Delta. We've got included in the cost estimate the land acquisition for the project, power supply and consumption, mitigation, there's a community benefits program, as well as a settlement agreement captured within the overall estimate. We have accounted for uncertainty in a couple of ways. First is contingency, and then we've got the inclusion of direct risk treatment or direct risk mitigation costs I'll highlight for you as well. So the estimate methodology, this is a bottoms-up estimate, also called a deterministic estimate. That might be a little atypical for a project at this early stage, but given the magnitude and complexity of the project, we felt it was worth the effort to really drill into these costs and help understand where we might have better opportunities to value engineer and manage those costs going forward. So that requires we think about all of the various activities, the labor, equipment, materials, and build up to that estimate number. This cost estimate is in 2023 real prices. These are undiscounted numbers, meaning they do not account for the time value of money, but that is captured in Dr. Sunding's economic analysis. I'll show you in just a sec. We've got a couple of reconciliation processes I'd like to highlight. This estimate classifies mostly as a Class 4 estimate, although there are some Class 5 components, and that would mainly be along the tunnel alignment, where we have some pretty large data gaps that still exist along the alignment. And then lastly, we get a lot of questions about this. The cost estimate, as well as the schedule we put together, assumes design, bid, build, procurement, and delivery. That's a conservative assumption at this point. We're still going through the process of evaluating potential opportunities and what may fit best for the various features of the project when it comes to the delivery timeframe. So in addition to the cost, we also needed to put together an overall schedule. This is to allow us to provide the cost and cash distribution to Dr. Sunding's team for the economic analysis. So we have at the very top the major permits completed by the end of 2026, transitioning into the design phase, really kind of overlapping with the tail end of those activities. Major construction would begin in 2029. That's first with the power right-of-way or power early works. That's a lot of access, roads, utility relocations, getting the shafts constructed as part of the tunnel contracts. Tunnel excavation activities would begin around 2033. We'd have a peak of construction in 2035 with all 4 tunnel reaches simultaneously under construction, as well as the pumping plant, intakes, aqueducts, discharge structures. So all the major elements of the project under construction at that point. The entire project would be constructed by 2042. Then we'd have a couple years of startup commissioning, full system turnover to the State Water Project by 2045. So this is the updated cost estimate, 2023 dollars. You see the numbers on the right-hand side, that table, totals to the bottom, 20.12 billion. The rough breakdown here, we've got about 3/4, 75% of those costs in the upper portion, which is the direct construction costs. That includes a 30% contingency, as well as about $500 million of direct risk treatment measures included in that estimate. The lower portion of the estimate, what we call other program costs, is about 25% of the total estimate. That includes all the soft costs associated with the project, as well as the land acquisition, almost $1 billion in mitigation identified by the environmental impact report, as well as the community benefits program, $200 million set aside for that program. So all of those are included in the cost estimate. As I mentioned, we had multiple reconciliations. I'll highlight one here on the next slide, which is comparing back to the 2020 cost assessment that was prepared for a slightly different version of the project, but still provides a really meaningful comparison at this point. So this slide compares the current estimate inside the gold box. That first column of numbers totals to 20.12 billion. Next to it, in the middle column of numbers, is the $15.9 billion cost assessment that was prepared back in 2020. That was for something that more similarly resembled the central alignment, so kind of a different version of the project, one that was also analyzed through the environmental impact report, but close enough so that we're able to make some extrapolations and escalations to kind of see where we would end up looking at it through a different method. So in this case, we take that $15.9 billion, just simply escalate it up using the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's construction cost trend indices, which show 26.8% escalation from 2020 to 2023. Take those numbers, escalate them straight across, we end up at 20.17 billion. So to me, the key takeaway here is with two very different approaches, we end up in a very similar place from a cost perspective, so that adds a lot of confidence to where we sit now in terms of our understanding of costs. The work back in 2020, although very early in the process, had sufficient contingencies and placeholders, which is really an art, not a science at that point in the process. But it still overall aligns very well with this entirely bottoms-up estimate with a lot of detail behind it. So now I'll shift gears to the topic of innovations. And so we do understand that the project described in the environmental impact report is intentionally conservative, intending to create a high-level umbrella of potential impacts, although it is a constructible and entirely buildable project. We wanted to go ahead and start analyzing those opportunities to reduce impacts, cost, or improve constructability. This is a real clear indication of how the project can evolve through future value engineering and really demonstrates the power of value engineering in terms of a cost management strategy. We started pulling all the ideas together from the design team, thinking about all the conservatisms that we knew were buried within the design. We settled on 19 what we consider very highly credible innovations at this early stage in the process, and actually included a secondary cost estimate in our cost documentation. So that secondary estimate captures these 19 innovations, but to be clear, these do not represent changes to the project description. That's something that DWR will continue to consider. An example of the types of innovations, on the left-hand side, we've got the pumping plant. This is the current, what we would call the EPR design. This is the new pumping plant in the South Delta as it's described in the environmental impact report. That's an entirely below-ground structure, so the ground surface has got the gantry cranes and the shade structures, but everything else is below ground. It's a very large rectangular concrete structure. It's about 600 feet by 400 feet below ground facility down to about 150 feet. So it's a pretty large below ground structure. It would be constructed top down, so that's with reinforced diaphragm walls, top down construction, intermediate floors and bracing as you work your way to the bottom of that excavation. In the middle of the pumping plant is the wet well, also a rectangular concrete structure that would connect the tunnel into the pumping plant, and then it's straddled by the rectangular concrete pump bays. So the innovation that we're looking very hard at is replacing those rectangular concrete pump bays with a series of interlocking shafts. That's an entirely conventional and reasonable construction, although we're stringing together a few more shafts than you'd typically see in the industry right now. And then replacing the central concrete wet well with an extended tunnel excavation that would provide essentially a large diameter header into the pumping plant. By doing this, just looking at the quantity reductions, we have significant quantity reductions of soil excavation, concrete, rebar, almost 1,000 days of construction time saved through significant reduced excavation with this method, just looking at those direct construction costs, those materials of concrete rebar and excavated materials, it's nearly $140 million saved with this one innovation. And all this by not really changing the above ground configuration, the features included in the project, nor the intent of how this facility would function. So that's one example. We racked up the 19 innovations, included a proportion of the risk treatment cost, added in the contingency, direct application of the other costs that you see down on the table. They rack up to a secondary estimate of $18.9 billion, so that's a 6% reduction, or about $1.25 billion we shave off the estimate through these very early innovations. There's still a lot of work that we want to be doing here to further vet and analyze these and other potential innovations, further analyze these in terms of risk reduction and schedule management. We're also looking at potential collaborative delivery contracting and what that might provide and how it might integrate with some of these design and construction innovations. So we see a lot of opportunity here, and I hope that comes through with the demonstration of this really early check-in on what we can do with some good value engineering. So with that, I will be turning it over to Dr. Sunding to carry on with the benefit cost analysis.
All right. Thanks, Graham. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Very good. Yeah, great to be with you. I wish you could be in person, but nice to see you by video anyway. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is some research that we've been up to for the past almost 2 years, looking at the economics of the DCP, and in particular performing what economists call a benefit cost analysis. So let's go ahead. Just a little bit of background. I'll go through this quickly because I know you have other items on your agenda. Jennifer covered this a little bit. It's important context. The State Water Project service area has about 27 million people in it. Again, a GDP of, if it were a country in its own right, about $2.3 trillion, which makes it the world's 8th largest economy, just a little bit behind the UK and France and a little bit ahead of Canada and Italy. Currently, it's about 2.56 million acre feet per year of deliveries on the State Water Project to a mix of urban and agricultural customers throughout California. Now, the DCP, and as a result, our economic analysis really focused on two future challenges that the State Water Project faces. First is climate change, and in particular, sea level rise and the implications that that has for the State Water Project. And I'll talk about this more in a minute, but just to begin, the modeling that we're using, the CalCIM modeling that we're using as a basis for our economic analysis, projects that deliveries on the State Water Project could go down by about 22%, so almost a quarter, by 2070 with the current infrastructure in place. So clearly a major disruption. The second long-term challenge on the State Water Project that we're focused on is the risk of an extended disruption. That's both in terms of quantity and quality of deliveries on the State Water Project following a large seismic event occurring in areas that are near the Delta. So again, we're looking at, in a benefit cost analysis, is just what it sounds like. We look at the cost of the project, the capital costs, operating costs, and then we also looked at some local environmental costs in the Delta and monetize those, both during the period of construction and then during the period of operations. And then on the other side of the ledger, we looked at the benefits of the project, the improvements in water supply reliability, water quality, and seismic reliability that result from construction and operation of the DCP. Kind of a bottom line, and I'll go through more detail on this in a minute, but a bottom line conclusion that we came to is that the project has a benefit cost ratio of 2.2 to 1. Which means that it passes a benefit cost test, which is another way of saying that it produces benefits to the ratepayers that ultimately receive the water, benefits of about 2.2 for every dollar spent. So good benefit cost comparison. So if there's one figure in my presentation that I'd like you to take with you when we're all done today, it's this one, because I think it does a lot of explaining of why we're finding the economic results that we are. Again, at current levels, with current infrastructure, current hydrology, without the DCP, the State Water Project is running at about 2.56 million acre feet per year. And that's, again, under current conditions. So imagine what would happen if we ran out into the future, ran out to 2070 is the year that we're using as kind of a benchmark in our analysis. And without the DCP in place, what the calcium models tell us is that deliveries are projected to go down about 22%, down to just below 2 million acre feet, or about 570,000 acre feet of supplies that would be lost under that scenario. So now let's keep 2070 conditions and imagine what would happen under that future hydrology with the DCP in place. And here you see the benefits of the project. So under future hydrology, with climate change occurring, we get back to a level of just under 2.4 million acre feet per year, or an increase of about 400,000 acre feet with the DCP in place. And again, that's under 2070 conditions. So the DCP doesn't fully mitigate for the effects of climate change and sea level rise in particular, but it goes a long way toward zeroing out that 22% decline in State Water Project deliveries. So what do more State Water Project deliveries allow? Well, they allow urban agencies in particular to fill storage more frequently. That's true even if the incremental deliveries from the DCP come during wet periods. That means in turn that agencies can enter drought periods with higher levels of reserves. That in turn results in fewer periods of mandatory rationing. And when rationing does occur, it's of reduced severity. So this is the source of a lot of the economic benefits that we're finding with the DCP in place. There are fewer shortages that have to be imposed on residential and business customers. And when the shortages do occur, they're not as severe as they would be otherwise. So real quickly on the urban side, we're looking primarily, when it comes to climate change, primarily at the value of the project to reduce shortages and make them less severe. We measure the value of that by a concept that economists call willingness to pay, which is also just what it sounds like. It's the amount of money that customers would be willing to pay to avoid a shortage of a given magnitude and duration. And there are a bunch of methods that economists use to do that. And we're using the latest methods that are available on that. For agriculture, the direct economic benefits of agriculture and a benefit cost analysis are measured in terms of agricultural profit. It's kind of the equivalent to willingness to pay from an economic point of view. We do that a couple of ways. We use the widely known SWAP, which stands for Statewide Agricultural Production Model. And then we augment that with water market transaction data to get a sense of what farmers are actually willing to pay for incremental water supplies. We also look at water quality benefits resulting from the DCP. Remember that the DCP adds diversion points on the Sacramento River, which reduces the salinity of State Water Project exports. The salinity impacts in the urban sector take the form of things like reduced treatment cost, improved taste, extending the useful life of appliances, and also reduce costs of water softening. We measure all that with a model that Metropolitan developed with the Bureau of Reclamation for use on the Colorado system. On the agricultural side, lower salinity provides for a more efficient agricultural water use. In particular, it reduces the amount of irrigation water that's needed to flush salts from the root zones, the so-called leaching fraction. So we put a value to that using our economic models, and then that's the basis for the salinity benefits in agriculture. Turning to seismic benefits, it's been well recognized for really for decades at this point that the State Water Project system is vulnerable to large earthquakes occurring near the delta on, for example, the Hayward and San Andreas faults. So we took a look at that and included it in the economic analysis of the DCP, which is more resilient to earthquakes than current infrastructure. Specifically, the scenario that we analyzed to measure seismic benefits come from a DWR document, the Delta Flood Emergency Management Plan. That's from 2018, excuse me. We use scenario 1, which they describe as their primary planning scenario. That envisions a 1 in 500 year event with 50 levee breaches and 20 islands flooded. We took those water supply impacts and then put an economic overlay to it. We use the same models that we're using to measure the value of water supply reliability and improve water quality for both the urban and agricultural sectors. So putting this all together, there are quite a few numbers on this page, so I'll walk you through it quickly from left to right. In our main scenario, which is evaluating the performance of the DCP under 2070 hydrology, 2070 levels of demand in both the urban and agricultural sectors, and assuming 1.8 feet of sea level rise, what we find is a benefit cost ratio of 2.2 to 1, meaning that for every dollar expended on the project, it generates $2.20 in benefits, primarily through reduced shortages. But in fairness, there is uncertainty about exactly what future climate will look like. And so we did what analysts normally do in this case, is we looked at the performance of this project under a variety of alternative future conditions. So if you look, say, at scenario 2, for example, here what we assumed is same 2070 hydrology as in our main scenario, but we asked, what if sea level rise is actually worse than anticipated? What if it's 3.5 feet as opposed to 1.8 feet? And in this case, not surprisingly, the benefit cost ratio is even higher. It's 2.63 to 1. And the reason for that is more sea level rise means with existing infrastructure, the facilities can't operate as often, yields are lower, therefore the benefits of the DCP are higher. So that makes good sense. But just really for the avoidance of doubt, we also evaluated the project under hydrologic conditions that are expected to occur when the facility begins operation. So we use 2040 hydrology. And I should mention all of the hydrologic simulations that we're using in the economic analysis are found in the EIR and its appendices. So there's no inconsistency there. But we looked at a couple of, just to go back, we looked at a couple of 2040 scenarios. Again, the hydrology that's expected right when the facility begins operating. And what we find is even in that case, even if climate change doesn't continue past 2045 when the facility would begin operating, it still has a positive benefit cost ratio. Under the median scenario, benefit cost ratio of 1.78 to 1. Under the so-called central tendency scenario, benefit cost ratio of 1.54 to 1. Okay, now we can go on. Another way of thinking about the economic benefits of the DCP, you saw parts of this figure in Jennifer's presentation, is to ask the question, well, all right, suppose climate change is going to result in a reduction in deliveries in the future under the current infrastructure. What if instead of building DCP, we invested instead in alternative water supplies to make up for those lost State Water Project deliveries? And from an economic perspective, not commenting right now on whether or not that's even technologically or politically feasible. From an economic perspective, it appears to be the case that alternative water supplies are significantly more expensive than the unit cost of the DCP. So the unit cost of the DCP, we estimate it being around $1,325 per acre foot. That's taking into account the time value of the water, which is sort of a typical method to calculate unit cost. Calculating unit cost the same way for some other alternative water supplies like desalination, recycling, and stormwater capture, you can see the dots in those, in those ranges. Those are the median costs of projects that were actually implemented in California. And you can see that they're quite a bit more expensive than the cost of the DCP. Now, the unit cost of the DCP is roughly equivalent to the unit cost of water conservation. And again, these are programs that have actually been implemented in California. But I would caution here a little bit. Remember, we're looking for the cost of water conservation to historic projects. Many of the easiest, cheapest water conservation alternatives have already been adopted, so those are gone. And most analysts expect the cost of water conservation, which is absolutely essential in California, expect those costs to increase over time. Let's go on. Last set of comments I would make is another way of thinking about the economics of the DCP is to consider what are the costs of doing nothing. It's been recognized for a long time, since the famous PPIC report of, 15 years ago or so, that the current situation in the Delta is unsustainable. One way or another, things are going to change. One way it can change is by investing in the DCP, and I've talked about some of the benefits of that. But another way of thinking about the project is to think about the cost, which are real costs, of doing nothing. If we just let current infrastructure run off into the future and climate change and sea level rise take their course, and we live with seismic risks over a period of the coming decades. So again, think about what that would mean. One cost of inaction is a 22% reduction in average state water project deliveries by 2070. So that's about 570,000 acre feet per year we'd be letting go. The direct impacts of that are reduced reliability and flexibility for state water project contractors, more frequent and larger water shortages and mandatory restrictions, an ongoing risk of a major seismic disruption, and a potential for investment in more expensive alternative supplies. All of those direct impacts have indirect impacts: higher rates for water for local agencies, impacts on employment and economic activity, particularly for agricultural economies in the Central Valley, but also for urban development in Southern California. For certain commodities, higher food prices would almost certainly be a result. And one important point, maintenance of surface water deliveries into areas like the San Joaquin Valley is compatible with the state's objective to stabilize groundwater resources. So one way of thinking about our economic results is that the cost of inaction certainly exceeds the costs of constructing and operating the project. And so in a very real sense, one way to think about our economic results is that the cost of doing nothing is actually higher than the cost of investing in the DCP.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sunding. Questions from the crowd here. I see that Mr. Scalzetti has a question.
Okay, Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity. One of my questions was, I'm just a little confused on the project always when I'm kind of looking at it. Is this more of like a maintenance project, or is this actually new water supply? Because it kind of is a melded thing. I just don't know. Is it a water supply? Is there new water from it, or is this a maintenance thing for the Delta?
We see this as stabilizing the state water project in the long run in the face of a changing climate. So with no action, we're going to have continuing declines on the state water project deliveries. So this is a way for us to stabilize the state water project in the face of climate change. So if you look at it compared to the baseline, it is more water, but it's not more water compared to today.
Because I don't even know if it was any more water that we're going to see any more water in our region, just because it's so far up there. And so when I battle this, I talk to my constituents, and I know it's kind of apples and oranges, but when I talk to them, they say, well, when is the state going to fix the sewage problem that we have in our South County that flows into the ocean? So it's a real tough sell to my constituents to talk to them to say, hey, they want to kind of fix the Delta or maintenance it or try to, and I can't really describe to them if it's a new water supply that we'll be paying for or using, but they're saying, hey, what about us down here? We have these other challenges that the state might be overlooking. So I just wanted you to know that we have a tough argument to our community and our constituents. Thanks for your time.
Director Myers.
Thank you, and thank you so much for coming down, and thank you so much for the presentation. There's a lot of information here and a lot to unpack. And I'm trying to decide kind of where I go with this, but I am interested in, and I guess maybe this is more for Dr. Sunding, although obviously anyone can weigh in. And I think, Doctor, you kind of emphasized, I think, slide 17, this water supply benefits graph. I think this is the one where you said if you take away anything, it's maybe this particular page here. But what I'm interested in is kind of an assumption that's being made here. You're working off of the 2020 without DCP with 2,560 TAF as sort of the baseline. And, down here, one of the things that we've really encountered, both in San Diego and at the MWD, is that we are at historical lows in water demand now. MWD is selling less water than it's sold in how many years? Many, many years. I mean, it's way under numbers that it's ever had. We're being affected, and our rates are being affected by the fact that we are just not selling as much water. It's not rebounding. It's not like, okay, there's more water now, and all of a sudden the number's going back up. It's not. It's not changing. And what I didn't hear in any of this presentation was any assumptions or other scenarios made on the basis that demand might be less. That maybe when we get to 2070, based upon these assumptions, and we're at 1,990 TAF, that might not be the demand number that our state needs. Mm-hmm. And that's not even considering, these new water regulations that are coming in, that are kicking in, now and in 2035. So I'd like to hear what scenarios you've run and how confident you are in these numbers that the demand may not be maybe around 1,990 in 2070 or even earlier than that. And are we just building a stranded asset?
Yeah, great questions, and obviously very important. And there's certainly ones that we considered when we did the economic analysis. And if you want to see all of the details for the demand forecast that the results rely on, it's all laid out in the report. We tried to give enough detail so that anyone who really knows these systems could get in and see what we were assuming. For purposes of right now, what I can tell you is that for Metropolitan and all of its member agencies, but also for other state water project contractors, and I'm talking now about the urban sector, we used whatever are their demand projections that are in their urban water management plans, or in the case of Metropolitan, we use the same demand projections that they're using in their IRP process. So we tried to be consistent as much as possible. But you're absolutely right. The benefits that we're calculating, because we're looking at future shortages under different configurations of infrastructure, a shortage is just demand minus supply. So the demand assumptions that we make are very important to calculating the shortages.
Well, if I can just add that, the IRP demand projections are changing rapidly, and just in the last year. And I'm assuming that this study is based upon numbers that are probably 5 years old, because some of the IRPs that we rely on down here are 5 years old. So if you're relying upon demand projections in coming up with what you think the demand's going to be in 2070, that your data is already wrong, in my opinion. So I'd like to hear more of a Reader's Digest version of what scenarios did you run if there's an assumption of lower demand?
Right. So we're looking at the 2022 updates to the IRP. So they are a few years old, you're right, but they're the most recent ones that we have available. Importantly, I'll note that we're not assuming any demand growth past 2045 once the project begins operating. So that introduces, I think, a degree of conservatism into the analysis. But for demands between now and 2045, again, for the metropolitan agencies, we used what was in the 2022 update.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dan?
Yeah, Dave, Dan Denham here. Question for you on slide 22. It has to do with the DCP unit cost. There's three parts to it. So the $13.25 an acre foot, is that based on an average yield of the project? Second question is, what we're typically used to seeing here at the Water Authority is the unit cost represents the midpoint of construction. And so I'm curious how that relates to that question. And then is the $13.25 additional to existing costs on the Delta or for the Delta? I can repeat all of that, Dave. Thank you.
No, I think I got it.
Right.
I like compound questions. So the 1325 is predicated on the incremental yields that come from the DCP. So again, we have CalSim runs that tell us yields under future conditions with the current infrastructure. Other runs tell us the same thing under the DCP. That gives us the incremental yields that I showed in the presentation. So that goes into the unit cost calculation. For the costs, we use the same costs that Graham described in his presentation. The other part of the calculation is that we take into account the fact that the costs are front-loaded, right? Construction happens before the project begins operating, but the benefits occur. We looked at a 100-year useful life following a 2045 start of an operating period, right? So we took that sort of the fact that the costs come before the benefits into account, like one does in a unit cost calculation. So there's a discount rate assumption that's built into that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Dr. Sunding, this is predicated on a big sip or big gulp, little sip, which means is we would be getting water in a big rain event or melt-off event in the Delta. The Sites Reservoir is predicated on a similar premise that it would be filled with excess water off of the Delta to fill the Sites Reservoir, which is, if I recall right, it's 1.5 million acre feet. And how would these two projects in that scenario of the big rain and we need to fill both of them, would there be a battle between the two of them to who gets the water?
I'd like to answer that if you don't mind. The State Water Project is senior in water right to the Sites Reservoir. So in those instances where, it's one or the other, it would be State Water Project. But in some of the more recent opportunities that have been documented for use of either the tunnel or Sites Reservoir, in fact, there's been so much water in the system that they would both be maximized. And that's the type of volume we're seeing. Now, that's not every storm. But for example, in 2023, when both projects were identifying the benefit, those benefits were not overlapping. They were in addition to each other. So it'll be different for different storms. There'll be dry years with opportunities to use each of these facilities. There'll be times when the State Water Project, is the primary use of that excess water because of the water rights priority. There'll be times when they both can be used. So it'll vary, but that's how the system will be set up if each of these projects does move forward.
So, okay, to whoever wants to answer the question. So what happens when we have a 10% allocation out of the Delta for Metropolitan? Does that 10% come through the Delta, or would that 10% come through the tunnel, or would the tunnel be vacant and it would just come through the Delta?
So the way that we are planning to operate the Delta Conveyance Project, it is a dual conveyance with the existing facilities. So we would generally seek to use the existing South Delta facilities first for a variety of reasons. One of them is it helps maintain water quality in the Delta. Another is it's less expensive. So if we can use those facilities, we will do that first. And so we would use the Delta Conveyance facility to opportunistically capture high flows. There are opportunities even during pretty dry years. There are sort of short durations, high flow events, and that's really a focus because those storms, while they may not be the same quantities of water, there are times that water is really important to the users.
So I take it that the Delta Conveyance would not be used in a low water event.
No.
So the concern I have is we have an empty pipe. So let me ask another question. And from 2000 to 2020, what was sea level rise? Did anybody know what that is? Did we raise 2 inches, 2 feet, 6 inches? Because that historically would give us an idea of what our sea level rise may be, I would think.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it has been since 2020, but we are looking at the guidance from the Ocean Protection Commission. So they updated that this last year. We're looking at about 1.8 feet for 2070 in the main economic scenario based on that guidance.
So 1.8 feet in 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Director Madaffer, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you for the presentations. I guess my first question, whoever wants to answer it, if the levees were to fail, let's say there's a 7.0 earthquake, which I'm sure will happen at some point, would the tunnel system still work?
Go ahead.
So the tunnels are being designed to a much higher design standard. So the return period event that the tunnels are intended to continue operating under would be a 1 in 2475 year event. So that's 1 in every 2,475 years. And that's to continue operating. So that's not pushing it to a factor of safety 1.0. That's just acknowledging that's a design criteria standard, but that the system would still operate. There are a number of benefits associated with the tunnel versus the surface facilities. The levees are built on top of a pretty unconsolidated, poorly consolidated peat organic zone that's highly saturated and subject to liquefaction. The embankments on the surface have to be constructed to a unique design standard because of those conditions. And even still, it's very hard to mitigate ongoing settlement, liquefaction issues. The tunnel will be constructed down in consolidated deposits, much older deposits below the depth of liquefaction. The cylindrical shape of the tunnel itself is empirically strong when it comes to managing stresses. In addition, as I mentioned, the design standards which are applied, which would impact the segment design, the reinforcement associated with the facilities. If there are any specific fault issues, for instance, fault crossings, that sort of thing, although not anticipated in alluvial conditions, we do have some rock at the very southern end that we need to cross through. That's where you can easily incorporate specific additional mitigations or additional design elements to manage specific seismic conditions. So it is a much more seismically resilient system than the existing surface facilities.
Well, that's great. So it sounds like the tunnel will survive, but you just mentioned how the levees, and any of us have been on the State Water Project tour knows those levees are pretty much going to go into liquefaction at a 7.0 or a greater earthquake, and then that water's just all going to go out into the bay anyway. So don't the levees have to be rebuilt and strengthened as part of this project? And if so, what's that going to cost?
So the levees are very important to the state overall. There are a lot of land uses protected by the levees, as well as the ability to maintain water quality in the Delta. And that is something that matters to us at the state. But it's not part of this project, and it's not really an alternative to this project. It's something that is happening with or without this project and separately.
Right. But my concern is just what you said. It's not part of the project. So you can have a great tunnel that's going to just be there no matter what happens. You can get an 8.0 and maybe the tunnel's still there, but the levees are gone and you ain't going to get no water into that tunnel because there's no more levees to get it there.
I'd like to.
So we did study one thing in the draft EIR. There's some information where we did look at if there is a seismic event and there are levee failures, is the saline water just coming up to the Delta conveyance intakes and therefore they wouldn't be usable? And the study found that because there is a depth change in the Sacramento River at Rio Vista, it gets a lot shallower at that point. The salinity doesn't really come further upstream from that. So the new intakes under a Delta seismic emergency condition would be usable. But I do appreciate that the levee maintenance is something that's very important to us as well.
And so if there was, okay, and I'm hearing you, and I don't want to get into a big argument on it, but I will tell you, let's say you did have a 7.0 or greater, and it changes the height of that part of the delta you just talked about. Now you've got seawater intrusion that goes maybe a couple miles up because of that. And that's one of the things that hasn't been really studied from what I recall. And I hear what you're saying. I guess going to another question, and this was in the doctor's presentation on climate change. I don't remember what slide. And I got 3 more questions here that I wrote down. But everything I've seen, and we had a presentation at the Colorado River Board a couple of months ago. Some pretty geeky climatologists spent almost an hour, and Mr. Heidemann and I got to listen to that. And it was interesting where they're basically saying, yeah, with climate change, warmer rain, warmer snow, the Sierra Mountains aren't going to be the big water reservoir we've been used to over the last 100 years. Isn't that going to affect the amount of water that the whole state water project has?
No, so that's true.
No?
I think there's projections that in the next 50 years we may lose snowpack in the Sierra, and that's almost unfathomable to comprehend. But as I showed, the modeling is showing that instead of it being in snow and that being our primary reservoir, which is how we use it now, snowpack,
Right.
is created, it melts slowly, we put in reservoirs, we slowly move it through the state. That's not going to be the case anymore. It's going to come in the form of rain or snow that quickly melts off. And so we're not going to be storing it in snowpack for the entirety of the winter months with a slow spring runoff. So the amount of precipitation isn't changing, but how it's coming is what's changing. And that reservoir snowpack is I think we can all see from various studies that it will no longer exist.
Right, but south of the San Luis Reservoir, there's no place to store more water.
I think there's a lot of investments that are happening, especially underground. I think we're seeing, Metropolitan just recently, for example, entered into some MOUs with various landowners and water districts in the Central Valley. A number of state water project contractors have various agreements for groundwater storage. There could be some additional above ground storage. I think groundwater storage is likely the way many are going, given the cost benefits and the reduced environmental impacts. But there's several million acre feet worth of storage available in the Central Valley. And I think as Sigma matures and GSPs are solidified and adopted, that there'll be a lot of opportunities for those partnerships that will be pretty cost effective, that will both provide benefits to subsidence as well as storage on the system.
Well, I sure hope so. I just read in the Farm Bureau, California Farm Bureau's Ag Alert paper, it was front page, that property values in the Central Valley have basically dropped by 60-70%.
Yep.
Because of Sigma. Last question, it's tied to that slide that's still up. What's the current estimated cost for the Delta Conveyance project?
I'll take that one, Dr. Sunding. It's $20.12 billion in 2023 dollars.
In 2023 dollars, so we can add another 6% or so, or 4%. So with this 1325, and Dan, you started asking it, so I want to ask it again. The 1325 is additive to the current DCP per acre foot price?
Or what is
It
the
would
current,
be.
what's the current cost right now if I was to buy, what's Met paying for an acre foot for DCP water, or for State Water Project water?
So let me caution, first of all, it's not right to simply add the State Water Project charges to the unit cost. The unit cost doesn't make any assumptions about how the project would be financed, how the costs would be spread around among potential beneficiaries. It's really measuring something different.
Like what?
Well, it's measuring the costs. So Graham talked about the capital costs. We also included the operating costs, and then simply dividing that into the water that would be created by the project over time. But that's very different than saying what would be the cost once the project is financed.
Okay.
That's a separate analysis.
Here's the reason I'm asking it, is because this agency at one point was contemplating a little tunnel of its own. And it kind of got killed because at one stage of the project, before it started producing any water, the cost was so high, nobody wanted to finance it. Or none of our member agencies. Many of our member agencies didn't want to go for it. But you're showing a number right there of spread out over time. Isn't there going to be a big spike during construction and before operating that we're not really seeing on this graph?
Well, the unit cost takes that into account, and
Right,
so
that's spread over how many years?
Well, so the unit cost, the way that works is it considers the cost just when they occur, and then it brings them back to a present value, and then it takes the value of the water that's going to occur after operations begin and brings that back as well.
All right. Well,
But again, that's different than a financed cost that you would have in rate.
I don't feel like I'm getting a clear understanding of what you're saying, but that's all right. I guess my last point is that, our Carlsbad desal plant cost $537 million to build. I think we paid, a little bit more for a pipeline financing cost, intake, call it $1 billion. And I just heard north of $20 billion. I understand desal water is going to be more expensive. But it sure seems to me you could build 5 or 6 desal plants. That would take care of all the urban needs. And then you don't even need your tunnels. The ag would be set without the tunnels. Ag would be happy because they're not, and then the people that need that desal water would be able to pay for it, outside of the San Diego area. So I just think we need to have a better holistic look at the whole state when it comes to the urban needs. You take away the urban, and that was a slide you had way at the beginning, and I think it was like 50-60% was urban out of the State Water Project, all things considered. Cover that with some desal plants and beneficial reuse, which we're seeing a lot more, like water, the Metropolitan and the Carson plant and things like that. I just think that needs to be looked at compared to a $20+ billion project that may or may not work. Thank you very much.
Director Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. So one of the issues before this board, and you've likely heard this before, is the supply transportation costs. So in Department of Water Resources in the past and currently, you define what costs are attributed to supply, or environmental is what I think the terminology, and it's basically everything in the delta to get the water. And then ultimately there's a transportation cost, which includes some variable costs with pumping. And so as we understand it, and this board is pretty familiar with the fixed variable part of it. But back when the Twin Tunnels was introduced, I believe DWR allowed the various agencies to charge on supply or transportation. And at that time, Metropolitan chose to define the entire thing as transportation. So personally, I do not believe that's right. And it should be 100% on supply. And we've talked about how this is a new supply source. We've heard Director Scalcetti mention it, and many of us mentioned that we're basically removing supply because of climate change and then replacing supply. People keep saying supply. And so for us, that is key until litigation is resolved because of our ID transfer is tied to transportation, which is tied to these costs. And so can you be more clear of how, if you were to define the costs, regardless of what agency does to define it, would you define it as supply? And then I have one other question.
Unfortunately, we aren't there yet. So I mentioned that there's quite a bit of more work to do before a decision is made in 2027. And part of that is refining the contract amendment that would be part of implementing this project. So that would be something that would come out of that contract amendment, and we're not there yet. So I think that's something that's part of the next couple of years of planning.
And then I think it's also important for the board to understand, we've talked about it, but it doesn't always come up. When you have 100 acre feet in the Delta, and you've created it, and we've shown many costs here and per acre foot costs, when it gets to Los Angeles, there are significant losses in the State Water Project system, and I'm trying to remember the number, 25% losses or 20% losses, something like that.
I think it's gone down. I'd have to look at it, but I think it's more on the order of 5 to 10%.
5 to 10%.
Are you referring to carriage water losses?
Yeah, everything.
No, like aqueduct losses, like inefficiencies.
Well, any
Yeah.
losses, like if you have
Like
100
once it's
acre feet
diverted.
that you purchase or you transfer, it starts, and then by the time it gets to...
Oh, that is, so you're right, that is carriage water losses, and that is a little bit different. So I thought we were talking about more like system inefficiencies, losses like through evaporation or
Yeah,
disrepair.
just the total.
But that's smaller. But the losses in the Delta for carriage water, that's a little bit different. So when we transfer water, there is a portion that has to go out through the Delta to maintain salinity in the Delta, sort of having the water do its share in salinity management. That's called carriage water, and that is usually 20 to 30%.
Yeah, so just an understanding for the board is when you buy or calculate the cost in the Delta, it's different by the time it gets down to us.
Yeah, but the benefits that we're talking about here, this is not subject to those carriage water requirements. That's all been calculated in the salinity management as part of our modeling effort. So it's not that we would sort of take a 20% off of this calculation. That's incorporated.
And the other losses are the 5 to...
It's pretty small. Like the repairs have gone
But
down. It
have
might
they-
even be less than 5%.
Have
Yeah.
they been calculated in the cost estimates or not?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If you don't mind, I would just want to get back to levies. It's a question that came up earlier, and also I think a number of directors in Aqua and other conversations I've talked to you about. I just want to be clear that on a couple things. One is that the state water contractors at large, all of us, my whole organization, always supports levee improvements. We have signed on to letters with Restore the Delta in support of various projects, including levee repairs. We are always 100% in support of that. Even if we started construction of the tunnel today, that levee system remains incredibly important to the state water project. So we don't see it as an either or, we see it as an and. Even once if the tunnel does come online, that those levees are still a critical part of maintaining water quality, maintaining the operations of the system. And I think I want to more directly answer the question that these are there will be a redundancy created through the tunnel. So we can operate either with the tunnel or without the tunnel or in combination, depending on various conditions. Some of that may be an emergency condition. Some of it may be for maintenance of water quality or for other factors that are in consideration once it comes online. But I just want to really underscore the fact that none of the contractors are interested in abandoning the levees as a state water project interest. And then as Carrie mentioned, as a statewide interest, that's just not part of the alternative. So while it's not part of the project, it's definitely not part of the thinking or strategy among any of the state water project contractors. I also want to touch on the comment around desal, and I wanted to remind the board that many of the other state water contractors, and including some of your colleagues within the metropolitan service area, are the areas within the state that are fastest growing for affordable housing and aren't as near the coast as you're lucky to be. And desal doesn't always pencil for them in the same way it could pencil for some areas closer to the coast. So they are looking at alternatives, but they're also, the costs are even greater as it relates to some of these other alternatives for them. And they're really trying to create space where people are commuting, as you know, west every day and what those eastern communities look like. And a lot of the growth that is occurring in the State Water Project service area is not necessarily occurring within your service area, but farther east. And those agencies have a different calculus of how they're looking at future demand. And I just, I think I kind of see, I know you're looking at San Diego, I'm looking at, State Water Project service area, and I just wanted to make you aware of some of the other considerations other agencies are having as they contemplate their own portfolios. Thanks for that moment.
Jennifer, how much money does the state put into levee repair each year? What's their budget?
Not enough. And the Delta Levee Subventions Program, I believe, kind of has run its course, and there's been a huge push from the Department of Water Resources to get more funding in both the general fund and within the climate bond. And I think it's a $1 billion issue in the state that has a volatile budget, and so we're constantly chasing it. But every time it's in the budget, you will see a letter from state water contractors supporting that budget item. You'll see DWR pushing for it. That it's not always, we don't get what we need, but whenever it's on the table, we're there to support it.
Thanks, Jennifer. I personally think we need to spend more money on the levees too. My concern is that while we're building the tunnel, the levees fail, and then we're out of water and we're building a tunnel. So, I think that part of our plan should be to work on the levees, and because the levees are so important to the whole state, it ought to be a state project, not a water users project, so to speak, because without the deltas, it destroys more than just our water supply.
That's true, and that's how the state treats it.
So, being a simple guy, I focus on dollars and cents a lot, and so I'm going back to Dr. Sunman's $1,325 an acre foot. So, in just very simplistic terms, that $1,325 an acre foot is the cost of the tunnel to get the water from south of Sacramento to the Bethany forebay. It does not include getting it from the forebay to us down here, does it?
That's right. It doesn't include conveyance to, remember, this is a statewide study. So the conveyance costs are going to be different depending on the place of use. But one would want to include the variable cost of conveyance. You don't have to build new conveyance facilities. So just the energy cost, essentially, of conveyance. And then also to make it comparable to something like desalination, you'd also want to include the energy cost and some other marginal costs of treatment.
In this dollars per acre foot, is it projected to be a cost amortized over 100 years or a shorter time?
This unit cost is calculated over a 100-year operating life, which is what's assumed for the DCP.
Okay. And then while I have you focusing on me, the IRP being used, I'm understanding, is from the scenario of MET is scenario D, which projects a huge increase in population, a large increase in storage. And what we're seeing in the trend at Metropolitan is exactly the opposite. We've actually trended below all the scenarios. So if you use scenario C, let's say, how would that affect your study on the Delta Tunnel, or Delta Tunnels, yes?
Yeah, so clearly there would be, if the demand assumptions are different, the estimated shortages are different, and then the estimated benefits are going to be different. So there is a chain there. That's definitely true. We did choose scenario D, and you're right. That is, in some ways, the highest demand scenario, highest demand on the MET system. But we're trying to balance a couple of things because we only have demand forecasts out to 2045, right? That's all Metropolitan provides. But the project is supposed to begin operations in 2045 and run for 100 years after that. We chose scenario D, but then didn't assume any demand increases from 2045 out for 100 years. So on balance, our judgment was that was a reasonable thing to do, but you're right. If we use different demand assumptions, we'll get different results.
Thank you. Anybody? Oh, boy, I got a whole list now. I must have touched a nerve because everybody wants to ask a question. Director Fong Sakai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to all of you for coming today. So my question is regarding the $20 billion cost and how it's going to be paid for. So I do understand the statewide benefits of a project such as this. But however, the Delta conveyance system, if it were to be built, will only be used less than 20% of the time. And we don't even know if water would be available to deliver water to us down here in Southern California. So my understanding is that only state water project contractors can pay for the proposed Delta conveyance system. And I'm seeing heads nodding, so that's a yes.
Well, I think it may be a little more nuanced, but maybe I should wait until.
So, I mean, we have gone through, in the last 30 years, an incredible capital improvements program to diversify our water system here in San Diego County. So we have very reliable sources of water now. Our rates are already very high here. And if the Delta conveyance system is to be built, this is going to translate into even higher water costs for our ratepayers. And due to the restriction as to who can finance a project such as this, can you explain to us how it's appropriate for our ratepayers to pay for this project that could be used less than 20% of the time, if at all? And is there anything that can be done to change it so that it could be more fair to all of the ratepayers in the state of California? Because as I see it, I don't think it's fair that only the contractors, the state water project contractors, are paying for something that will benefit the entire state.
So I can maybe start, and Jennifer can drive home with more gusto. So I will say that historically the State Water Project has been a beneficiary pays project, and so we have funded improvements or maintenance through issuing revenue bonds that are repaid by State Water Project rates. That said, I think that we're hearing comments kind of like the concerns that you're saying pretty regularly as we've been out and about talking to agencies, and the idea of trying to bring in state or federal funding is certainly something that we've heard repeatedly, and I think that we are looking over the next few years to investigate further alongside the state water contractors to see what those opportunities are. I think particularly on the state side, if there was a specific state funding, there would need to be some benefits identified for sort of the overall state purposes. And so there may be some revisiting of how those benefits are allocated, but I think there may be opportunities there, and I'm hoping that we'll have the chance over the next 2 years to really dive into that in more detail. And Jennifer, maybe you have some additional points.
Yeah, I just want to kind of sympathize with you. I think we really, struggle with this because there are benefits that accrue outside ratepayers, right? It's not a closed economy where you buy the water and then you are the only recipient of the benefit. And I think we're just really struggling with this across all water infrastructure right now and across the whole State Water Project. And we have to, I think, collectively start to think about how we better articulate what those benefits are and how to cost share with them. This particular project, because of its controversial nature, has been, almost unspeakable to talk about, public dollars. But I think Dr. Sunding's report is showing that there's benefits accruing outside the ratepayers. And I just think I want to just emphasize, I think there's a shared frustration across all of the water users within the State Water Project system. And again, not just on this project, but for example, repair of subsidence facilities or even construction of new storage that is going to take pressure off of the environment during drought conditions. That's, a benefit to ratepayers in terms of water supply reliability, but it's also a benefit to the state in terms of how we manage natural resources and how we articulate those benefits. We haven't really caught up in the way that we are sharing costs, but that is a major focus of what I'm doing. I think it's an interesting point to say, the 20% use factoid as well. we also build dams that sometimes we don't need for flood control, and that's just kind of the nature of a lot of the water infrastructure we build. Now, that's different for things like, for example, recycled water facility or a desal, where you can, run that under, a much wider range of conditions, but they have different costs and benefits, just like different types of water infrastructure does. And that's why I was trying to point out in my presentation that you have to piece this portfolio together in an affordable way. So you may not use a reservoir you construct all the time. In fact, 10 years ago, nobody thought storage was a limiting factor in our system. And it turns out after 2017, 2019, 2023, we're finding that actually, even if you only fill storage every so often, it's still a huge benefit to have in place. So we model these things on yearly averages and long-term climate, but it's almost more anecdotal than that. And I think it makes it harder to kind of wrap our heads around what is the cost benefit of it. And then this added factor of you've got a wider group of beneficiaries. So I'm not, I'm a good answer for you. I'm just sympathizing with you on that because I think we're all kind of struggling with how to look at these things in a way that really fully accounts for all of the variability and some of the unknowns in the future that we have and how to make decisions around wise investments.
Director Hogan.
Thank you, Chair. It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the State Water Project supplies with the tunnel as designed, that 65% of the flow for State Water projects would be in Delta flow, right? And about 45% would go through the tunnel. That's the number I've seen out there for quite a while. Is that accurate?
I must admit, I'm not sure of that division. When Director Fongsakai said 20%, I was thinking, I'm not sure 20% is right, but I don't have that number in the top of my head. I can certainly follow up.
Yeah, just based on the past experience at Met and the numbers, haven't heard that change. So which means it goes back to the levy. Levies are part of the program, and part of they're going to exist, and it's going to have to continue to be maintained through some sources, the state. So the question of maybe the delegates, or maybe Marty, you could answer. Metropolitan owns islands in the Delta. Are they currently paying to maintain the levees around those islands?
Well, Jennifer could probably answer that, but from my knowledge, there is a budget for repairing levees in general, and the Metropolitan gets a share of that, and they do repair levees as they have the capital to do so.
My point being is that when they bought the islands, they bought into some ongoing maintenance of the islands, so we're already paying for some maintenance through our ratepayers for those levees at some level. I'm not sure what it is. I just wanted to get clear about that inflow and the long. I think, Jennifer, your explanation is, we build dams, it's seasonal that goes by. I mean, the tunnels would be very valuable at certain times, but then last year, the second year of a wet year, it's very possible the tunnels wouldn't have benefited us all because the demand was down so low and we had no place to put the water. So I think that's an example of maybe that you're talking about. The seasonal variations are going to drive when the benefit of the tunnels exist. Yeah. And the last thing I want to say is that 1,325 acre feet. It's interesting to hear the discussion about what that number means, but and I think Dr. Sundling hit on it. That's a number that has not been allocated to the state contractors. So as far as Metropolitan goes, and from our perspective, that number could be a lot different when you allocate it out to what the state contract cost is for Metropolitan versus other people and other state contractors, because it's not going to be the same amount, I'm assuming. So just to point that out. Thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Mike. I think one of his charts showed that there's different takers with different costs. Obviously, we have to bring it a lot farther. If you have this is just a basic comment, the Sites Reservoir goes in, and the Sites Reservoir costs $1,200 an acre foot for water as it comes out and gets delivered to the Delta. You add $1,325 to get it through the tunnel. You add $600 to get it over the mountains to Metropolitan, and then Metropolitan puts their piece of the pie on it. You can see how this stuff snowballs into quite a large chunk of money. I'm a little pessimistic that it'll be built for $20 billion by the time 2045 rolls around, but all we can do is project what we can project. There's no way of knowing. I have Director Abdullahi.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a member of this committee, but I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in here. So on slide 116, there was a mention about the consumer's willingness to pay to avoid shortages in the economic models or peer-reviewed economic models that were used. So I was curious to know what kind of assumptions went into those models, especially given the in-depth discussion that we recently had here at the Water Authority as well as Metropolitan with the increased rates. And I think some of my directors already mentioned about the decreased demand that we've been seeing over time, affordability remaining to be an issue. So I'm just kind of curious to know if the rising cost of living and affordability were taken into consideration with these economic models.
Sure, yes. The answer is yes, it was. These are the estimates of willingness to pay are based on actual rates and actual water consumption at all the state water contractors. And then there's additional information that we bring to bear in terms of things like demand elasticities, how demand responds to price, that gives us a sense of if consumers can purchase as much as they want at going rates, that's your baseline situation. Then if we impose something like 10% rationing, well, there's some water then that people would like to purchase that they can't. That results in a loss to them. And we can use the current rate information, and you're right, they have increased dramatically in recent years. Use current rates, current levels of consumption, estimates of demand elasticity that we've developed over the years with Metropolitan and other agencies, put that all together to estimate willingness to pay. And I should say, again, all of the details for the data that went into that, the exact methods, they're all laid out into the report. So if you've got specific questions about the information we used for any given agency, it's all there for you to look at.
Director Hilliker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at this, and it's just unsustainable. I don't know how this is going to get done. And we're going to have our grandchildren's grandchildren paying for this thing, and then they're going to probably have to pay for a bunch of infrastructure on top of that. Aside from the levees, we've got a dam problem in California. Yes, dams. So why aren't we fixing those too? We've got plenty of, in San Diego, we've got all these high hazard dams that can only be filled halfway up. And it just shows that maintenance all the way around is just really lacking. I've been up on those levees, and I don't know how many gopher holes I've fallen in off of my buddy's farms up there, but it's just crazy. And I just think of all the critters that are running through those things, I'm surprised they're still there.
Okay, anybody else have questions? I don't see any hands up, and we really appreciate you coming down and talking to us. Even though we're giving you a hard time, we do appreciate it.
We appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
I am a proponent of fixing the levees, so Jennifer, I'm on your side. I think that the state should fix them. If it's $5 billion, it's $5 billion. I look at the tunnel at the 1325. I add up the money. I add $900 an acre foot on top of the 1325, and today we're talking $2,200 an acre foot water. I can only guess what it'll be in 2045, but when we're looking at 2250 today, and Met Water's at 950, that's quite a shock to your wallet. We also at Metropolitan have the dilemma of trying to build pure water. And pure water has a cost range of up to $6 to $7 billion to produce 150,000 acre feet of water. And then we have the Sites Reservoir that Metropolitan's got a piece of the action in. And then we've got our own inner pipeline issues. We're putting $1 billion into the Sepulveda feeder to move water to the state water dependent areas. And at some date here, there isn't any more money. And so we're going to have to pick a project. We can't do all of the above, or we're going to have $5,000 water. So we really have a dilemma. I know you have a dilemma because you want to build the Delta pipeline, and I can see in resiliency and dependability, it's a big thing. But so would the Delta if we fix the levees. That's going to be a big deal, and it's got to be done. So I'm a proponent of fixing the Delta levees now while we plan for the Delta tunnel later, because we can't afford a catastrophe. And we don't know when that 7.8 earthquake's coming. It might come tomorrow. It might never come in our lifetime. But anyhow, I do appreciate you coming down and talking to us. I think we're all in this together, and we all want to find a solution. The bad part of it is somebody has to pay, and somebody has to decide what they want to pay for. Is 100% reliability what you want to pay for? Can we live on 80% reliability? That's a decision we have to come to terms with before we can make the decision. So again, thanks for coming and talking to us. And I have no more questions. We will move on to the next round of our meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Sunding. Do you have anything you wanted to say or do?
No. I mean, we can recall for stuff.
Well, we only have the delegates report.
Let's 5-minute break.
Let's take a 5-minute break so we can gather our minds after that. That went a little longer than I thought. Well, I thought that was worthwhile, so I thank everybody for all your questions. We'll move on through our rest of our agenda as quickly as we can. We have the Met Delegates report, which I'll start off with. Over the past months, Met staff has made a series of presentations on the State Water Project like we've heard today. There's this month's presentation on the risks to the Delta and water exports with a focus on the Delta Tunnel like we had today. We did that the last meeting. These presentations are the foundation for the consideration of the board for the DWR request for Met to provide an additional $142 million for planning costs. Those costs are geotechnical, surveying, planning, design. We have already contributed $160 million. This $142 million is unbudgeted, and we're grappling with how to play along and where we're going to find the money. And there are different machinations going on how that's going to come about. And as you notice in the presentation, 25% of the cost of the Delta Tunnel is in soft costs, and that's exactly what they're asking us to pay for, is soft costs. So 25% is $5 billion. So this is just the beginning of a long slog. So anyhow, we'll be considering that the next board meeting. You may recall the need for the funding is a result of the court decision against DWR seeking bonds to pay for this. There was a stay put on it, and they're working through that. Your delegates are asking questions to understand the rate and financial impacts this will have because it's unbudgeted. Many Met board members have asked several other questions, obviously, and we're waiting answers. Even with the tunnel, which is Met's estimated share would be about $10 billion, it's actually 47% of the total cost. Met says it expects to get 80% of its water through the Delta, which is what I've been saying, at 20% through the tunnel. The Delta is very important because without it, we're going to try to survive on 300,000, 400,000 acre-feet of water. Given the projection, board members have asked if shoring up the levees to protect the Delta from the risks like sea level rise and earthquakes would be a more cost-effective approach to meet Met's needs. This approach might also bring more funding sources to the table while providing multiple benefits and further reducing costs. For example, flood control. Met staff also says that even with the tunnel, it believes additional major investments will be needed to mitigate the risk in the water project. The bottom line of these costs need to be factored and decided on what we can build and what we can pay for, and what do we all want. What are we willing to pay for? Based on reports we received to date, Met does not have the financial capacity to do all of these projects. in terms of debt financing or rate sensitivity. So the board has some tough decisions. One of them, I've said multiple times, the next biennium budget with Pure Water being built to its full capacity, the CIP was going from $323 million a year to $1.5 billion a year. And that was going to be built into the rate structure. They've now decided to phase the Pure Water, so that will bring down the initial cost. Now I'll go to Director Fonseca for her report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A very important decision is coming up in November regarding the Pure Southern California project, which is to decide whether to accept a $99 million federal grant for the project, which requires a 3-to-1 match of $300 million in matching funds that are also not in MET's budget. Staff was asked to show where this $300 million in matching funds will come from, but so far we have not received any details or information. Some of the money is expected to come from the Los Angeles County Sanitation District, which in return would receive a portion of the grant funding. MET staff was also asked to provide a report on whether accepting this grant obligates MET to implement the project or any portion of it. Also, we asked whether MET would be required to return the funding shared with and used by the sanitation district if the MET board does not move forward with a program consistent with the original application and grant requirements. Interim General Manager Apatahe has said that there is a risk that MET might be required to repay the funds, and then staff would not recommend accepting the grant in that instance. These two decisions on Pure Water and more funding for tunnel planning will have a very real financial impact on us here at the Water Authority, our member agencies, and ratepayers. So if you have any thoughts or input or guidance on these issues and matters, please do talk to us. And I'll turn the next part of the report over to Director Smith.
Yeah, thank you. So at the same time, Met Board is being asked to approve more than $400 million in spending for Pure Water and the tunnel, we're already experiencing a major budget shortfall. We ended our last fiscal year with almost $400 million budget deficit, primarily driven by lower than budgeted water sales. This was managed by paying PAYGO, switching to PAYGO, and covering the O&M costs through reserves and using a $100 million line of credit. Reserves are running near the lower goal limit. Although the board adopted a budget based on 200,000 acre-feet, lower water sales than prior year estimates, water sales are still tracking at about 15% below budget through the first 3 months. So we still have 2 unresolved budget issues, even though we just passed a new budget. As part of the budget resolution, staff was directed to identify and make $36 million of cost reductions, $18 million per year over 2 years. And this is about 3% of MET's O&M costs. So these cost-saving measures have yet to be identified, but we were told that we're expecting a report in November. And the second one is the 2-year budget included securing $120 million in new revenues from selling water out of storage, which the general manager at the time, Haj Khalil, offered as part of our budget and rate process. So far, through our agreement here with MET and the Water Authority and IID, we've got between 17 and 25 million. So we still have a shortfall in that area of about $100 million. And that completes my report, and I'll turn it to Ms. Goldberg.
Thank you, Director Smith. I'll try to be brief. Earlier this week, we held a special joint meeting of the Executive Committee and the Board to consider personnel matters related to the General Manager. No action was taken, despite 5 hours of talking, and the GM's period of administrative leave was extended until the investigation is complete. Earlier this month, the general managers held a first retreat to start their effort on reviewing Met's business model. And while there was good participation, including by our own general manager, they have a long way to go in bringing recommendations back to the board, which at this time are expected in March of 25. Met is not holding its task force meeting on the Climate Adaptation Master Plan for Water, or CAMP, in October, so that staff may have more time to focus on the concerns that have been expressed to date and preparing for our November meeting. The CAMP process is being directed at a very high level by our board chair Ortega, Vice Chair Sudley, and myself, and LA Delegate Matt Peterson, who chairs the task force. Needless to say, the board is deliberating historic changes for Met and its business model, and it's important that we take the time to get it right, and I believe that is the board's commitment. Thank you very much, and I will go back to Chair Miller. Thank you.
Thank you, fellow delegates. Anybody have any questions for the delegates? If not, we'll move along. Chair Medaffer, did you have any comments on Colorado River?
No, sir.
Okay. With that, we've done the closed session, and we are adjourned. Oh, we have a question? Michael.
Thanks. Gail, you made a comment about the camp, was that we're going to slow down and do this right? And the camp is being developed that will be kind of the funnel for making decisions.
Yes.
Going forward. And so you got those three issues. You got pure water, the Sites Tunnel, and the tunnel issue, which are, and then there's decisions coming up with regards to millions of dollars committing to go forward, even though it's an increment, it's a $100 million. Mm-hmm. So my point being is, shouldn't they just pause the decisions on those items until we do it right with the camp and have these projects go through so there's a decision? I know I would advocate you to vote no on all those things until we get this process settled,
Well, I think that you are correct in assuming that there are folks at Met also, many of the delegates, who have a concern that we have gotten far enough along in the camp process to really have a good process for not only evaluating the process, but understanding in advance of that what the need is so that we can be looking at time-bound targets. It's very complicated. I think we're getting a lot of feedback from the general managers and the task force to better articulate the process and make sure that we are all comfortable with all the steps of the process before we're being asked to make multi-million-dollar decisions. I think, as you have heard, as we talk about what our capacity is, given, that we already have a lot of debt and our capacity for bonding is limited, the reality is that the first decision we make may be the last decision we make for quite a while. And so you're right. We're looking carefully at the process, and I think people are reluctant to make a decision too early.
Yeah, I guess you're faced with a decision as early as next month, is what I'm hearing, with regards to some of these projects. So I'm sure the Met team's going to strategize on how best to move forward and how to handle those votes that are coming up before the rest of the formal process has been adopted. So I think there's a lot of strategy that needs to go into how you vote, and you need to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. We're adjourned. The board meeting will commence immediately. As soon as Serrano can get to the chair.
Fong Sakai? Aye. Macedo? Medaffer? Yes. Chair Serrano?
Yes.
Director Steiner?
Yes.
Vespi?
Yes.
Whitburn?
Yes.
Secretary Lyons?
Yes.
Director Hogan?
Yes.
Castaneda?
Yes.
Elitharp?
Yes.
Arant? Miller?
Yes.
Ray?
Yes. Yes, it passes.
Thank you. With Director Croucher joining us via satellite, as you can tell, all votes today will be taken by a roll call vote. As we move through our agenda, I will be moderating requests to speak. To request to speak, please press the speaker button at your seat. I'd like to ask Vice Chair Hilliker, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Acosta. Here. Quirm. Here. Katz is absent. Director Pohl.
Yes, here.
McMillan is absent. Scalzetti.
Here.
Vice Chair Hilliker.
Here.
Director Yamani.
Here.
Director Leahy is absent. Director Myers.
Here.
Director Croucher.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Quaylen.
Here.
Director Ike is absent. Heidemann.
Here.
Wiley.
Here.
Norman. Here. Bays is absent. Director Abdullahi.
Here.
Bukowitz.
Here.
Fong Sakai.
Present.
Director Macedo is absent. Madaffer.
Here.
Chair Serrano.
Here.
Director Steiner.
Here.
Vespi.
Here.
Whitburn.
Here.
Secretary Lyons.
Here.
Director Hogan. Castaneda.
Here.
Elithart.
Here.
Arant. Miller. Ray.
Here.
Supervisor Desmond. Chair Serrano, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have any proxies today?
We do have proxies. We have Scalzetti. Director Scalzetti is the proxy for Director McMillan. Director Quirm is the proxy for Director Acosta if required. And Director Arant is the proxy for Director Leahy.
Great. Thank you very much. Do we have any public speakers?
I have no written comments. If there are public speakers in the Zoom waiting room, please raise your hand through the Zoom app or press *9 if you are listening by phone. I see no speakers, Chair Serrano.
Thank you. Are there any additions to the agenda?
No additions.
Okay. Seeing none, we will move to the approval of the minutes. Do we have approval of the minutes for the formal Board of Directors meeting of September 19, 2024? I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Director Madaffer, a second from Director Ray. Kelly, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Acosta?
Yes.
Quirm? Pohl?
Abstain.
Scalzetti?
Yes, yes on McMillan, abstain on Scalzetti.
Okay. I'll figure that out later. Vice Chair Hilliker?
I wasn't here last month.
Okay, I'll make a note. But, thank you. Yamani? Myers?
Yes.
Director Croucher?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Quaylen?
Yes.
Heidemann?
Yes.
Wiley?
Yes.
Norman? Abdullahi?
Yes.
Bukowitz?
Here. Yes.
Fong Sakai?
Aye.
Madaffer?
Yes.
Chair Serrano?
Yes.
Director Steiner?
Yes.
Vespi?
Yes.
Whitburn?
Yes.
Secretary Lyons?
Yes.
Director Hogan?
Yeah.
Castaneda?
Yes.
Elithart?
Yes.
Arant? Miller? Ray?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the resolution honoring Director Gary Hurst on his retirement from the Water Authority Board of Directors. Director Hurst, as you know, represented the Ramona Municipal Water District and has served on the board since May of 2021. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve this resolution.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Vice Chair Hilliker, a second by Director Yamani. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Acosta?
Yes.
Quirm? Pohl?
Yes.
Scalzetti?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hilliker?
Yes.
Director Yamani?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes.
Croucher?
Yeah.
Smith?
Yes.
Quaylen?
Yes.
Heidemann?
Yes.
Wiley?
Yes.
Norman?
Yes.
Abdullahi?
Yes.
Bukowitz?
Yes.
Fong Sakai?
Aye.
Madaffer?
Yes.
Chair Serrano?
Yes.
Director Steiner?
Yes.
Vespi?
Yes.
Whitburn?
Yes.
Secretary Lyons?
Yes.
Director Hogan?
Yeah.
Castaneda?
Yes.
Elithorpe?
Yes.
Arant? Miller? Ray?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. I know that we have Director Hurst with us today. Director Hurst, I didn't realize until today that you and I came onto the board at the same time in May of 2021. It's been a pleasure serving with you. And in the words of Boyz II Men, although we've come to the end of the road, I know that I speak for all of us when we thank you for your dedicated service to the Water Authority and representing the Ramona Municipal Water District. And we wish you well in your retirement. I'd like to invite you up, Director Hurst. We have a small gift and offer an opportunity for you to say a few words. Director Hurst.
You didn't get the right shirt on.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Nick was right. We came on the board at the same time in May of 2021. That was 2 months after I received a stem cell transplant. And so I needed to attend all of the meetings for the next 2.5 years remotely, which was an inconvenience to some of you, I know, beyond the COVID inconvenience. My initial contact with the Water Authority was through staff. And one of the things that I quickly learned was that the staff is available 24/7. They return my calls, my questions from email on Sundays, Saturdays, you name it. They were very, very forthcoming, sharing their expertise. I consider them to be the most expert staff that I've ever worked with in any of my endeavors that are now 76 years old. So I thank you all. I will miss working with you. I will also miss working with the directors. I have enjoyed my time with you, and I will miss it. Thank you. You're the first person I talked to at the Water Authority. There we go. Good spot. 1, 2, 3, and let's get this foot as well. Outstanding. Thank you. Done. I know you're watching all this stuff.
All right, and with the retirement of Director Hurst, we have the appointment of Director Diane Princess Norman, representing the Ramona Municipal Water District, with her term ending August 9th, 2028. Director Norman, welcome to the Water Authority Board of Directors. We're happy to have you. Would you like to make any comments at this time?
Not at this time. I'm still learning how to use these devices. But thank you for your welcome. Everyone's been very warm. I'm glad to be here. What a meeting you guys have, I'll tell you. Thank you.
This is just the beginning. I do also want to note that we have another new director joining us, Rick Paul, representing the city of Escondido. Welcome to the San Diego County Water Authority. I'm told that we'll do the formal stuff for you next month, but he has been sworn in, so he's legit, just so everyone knows. But we will do the formal appointment next month. There's no vote needed there, so we will move on into our reports. So I'd like to begin my chair's report by, again, sharing how honored and humbled I am to begin my service as the chair of the Water Authority. As you all know, one of the first things I've done is to ask our former chair, Mel Katz, to serve as chair emeritus, which he has graciously accepted to do. And so I know that the board officers and I are grateful to be able to have his advice and counsel as we move forward. Our clerk sent you all the committee interest surveys on October 2nd with a submission deadline for tomorrow. If you have not yet submitted your survey, please see Kelly today for a hard copy that can be completed following the meeting. I will be conferring with the board officers on November 14th to review all of your preferences and determine committee assignments for 2025 through 2027. And so we will take all of those requests into consideration at that time. As we have discussed earlier, I'm continuing to take part in settlement discussions alongside our general manager, general counsel, and Chair Emeritus Katz surrounding our longstanding litigation with Metropolitan. This remains one of my top priorities, and I also remain ever optimistic about being able to get it accomplished. With that being said, we will move on now to, that will conclude my chair's report. We will move on to the consent calendar. Kelly will provide a report of the actions taken today by each committee.
Thank you. I'll just get that on the screen. There it is. So at A and F noted and filed the Treasurer's report. They approved the 2025 board meeting dates calendar and adopted an ordinance making amendments to Chapter 4.08, Section 4.08.040 of the Admin Code. Engineering and Operations approved Amendment 2 to the legal services contract with Cameron Daniel PC in the amount of $150,000, increasing the contract amount from $150,000 to $300,000. They awarded a contract to Wood Rogers Inc. for a not-to-exceed amount of $3 million for a period of 3 years with the option to extend 1 year. LPO adopted a position of support on the Federal Bill S-5012, Lower Colorado River Multi-Species Conservation Program Amendment Act of 2024, and they awarded a contract to Pace Government Relations for 24 months with the option to renew additional 24 months for federal advocacy services for a total compensable contract amount not to exceed $357,000. Water planning had no reportable action, and imported water had no reportable action. That concludes the reports.
Lovely. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar, items 9.1 through 9.7. I heard a motion from Director Scalzetti, second from Director Miller. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Acosta?
Yes.
Quirem?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Scalzetti?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hilliker?
Yes.
Director Yamani?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes.
Croucher?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Quaylen?
Yes.
Heidemann?
Yes.
Wiley?
Yes.
Norman?
Yes.
Abdullahi? Buckowitz?
Yes.
Fong Sakai?
Aye.
Medaffer?
Yes.
Chair Serrano?
Yes.
Director Steiner?
Yes.
Vespi?
Yes.
Whitburn?
Yes.
Secretary Lyons?
Yes.
Director Hogan?
Yes.
Castaneda?
Yes.
Elitharp?
Yes.
Arant? Miller?
Yes.
Ray?
Yes, with the exception of 9.7, which I need to abstain from.
Thank you. Noted. Consent calendar passes.
Thank you very much. We will move on to our action, discussion, and information items with item 10A, the biannual review of the representatives to the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I'll start with some opening comments. Pursuant to our administrative code, all Metropolitan Water District of Southern California delegates are to be reviewed in October of even number years. My October 2nd, 2024 memo served as a notice of my intention to present this biannual review of the Water Authority's MWD delegates at today's board meeting and for the board's consideration and confirmation. In undertaking this review, as I noted in my memo, I took into consideration, among other things, the Water Authority's longstanding policy objectives at MET, including its leadership, water supply reliability, finances, and rate structure, and the individual and collective skills and experience of our MWD delegates. I also considered the successes on MWD key issues, for example, the last two budget and rate setting processes, appointment and election of the delegates to board leadership roles, and MWD's and the Water Authority's collaboration and partnerships to provide cost-effective water management solutions. Further, it's my intent and desire to ensure we have a team of delegates that can achieve our objectives at MET and change the dynamic from what has been to what we need now, which is prioritizing collaboration and partnerships to benefit not only the San Diego region, but Southern California as a whole. I believe our delegates are doing some great work representing us up at MET. Look no further, as I just mentioned, than all of them are serving in leadership roles, and I think that speaks to the caliber of the representatives that we have here and who we are sending to represent us. As you all know, Director Smith has also announced that he will be stepping down as a delegate at Met. He has informed me that he intends to continue his service through the end of the year. Therefore, the item before you today is a request to consider our Met delegates reviewed and to appoint Chair Emeritus Mel Katz as a contingent appointment to Director Smith effective January 1. As I shared in my memo to the board, Chair Emeritus Katz has played an instrumental role in improving the relationship between the Water Authority and our counterparts at Met. His leadership as chair has been defined by a commitment to open dialogue, collaboration, and meaningful progress, which are all traits I believe we must continue at Met. And so as we look ahead, I believe our vision for the Water Authority's engagement with Met centers on strengthening collaboration, reducing conflicts, and focusing on shared interests. So to that end, I believe Chair Emeritus Katz is uniquely positioned to help us realize this vision alongside Lois Fonks-Kai, Marty Miller, and S. Gail Goldberg. And so, colleagues, I bring this item for your consideration here today. I'm happy to entertain a motion or any discussion.
Second.
This is Director Croucher with a motion to approve.
I have a lot of motions. I have a motion from Vice Chair Hilliker, a second from Director Medaffer, and any discussion?
Director Croucher.
Director Croucher.
First, I want to congratulate you on your chairmanship and with Mel Katz accepting the chair emeritus as the past chair and as the immediate past chair emeritus. I know you guys will have your hands full, but I think we're in good hands as we move forward. I do want to thank Director Smith as our MWD delegate at Met and his willingness to continue on till his term ends, as you pointed out. But I would like to ask that if staff could let us know when the MWD plans on recognizing him and his departure at Met. I and I'm sure there's some other directors that would like to attend that recognition for his services. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Croucher, and so noted. Any other discussion? Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Acosta.
Yes.
Quirem.
Yes.
Pohl.
Yes.
Scalzetti.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hilliker.
Yes.
Director Yamani.
Yes.
Myers.
Yes.
Croucher. Croucher. Can you give me a thank
Sorry
you?
about that. Yeah.
Thank you. Director Smith. Oh, yes,
Yes.
Smith. Quaylen.
Yes.
Heidemann.
Yes.
Wiley.
Yes.
Norman.
Yes.
Abdullahi.
Wholehearted yes.
Buckowitz.
Yes.
Fong Sakai.
Aye.
Medaffer.
Yes.
Chair Serrano.
Yes.
Director Steiner.
Yes.
Vespi.
Yes.
Whitburn.
Yes.
Secretary Lyons.
Yes.
Director Hogan.
Yes.
Castaneda.
Yes.
Elitharp.
Yes.
Arant. Miller. Ray. Motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and thank you all very much for your support of that item. We will now move into our reports. General Manager's report.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. General Counsel.
Nothing to report.
Director Katz is absent for the SANDAG report. SANDAG Subcommittee on Borders, Director Macedo is also absent. Regional Planning, Director Yamani.
Nothing to report, Chair.
Thank you very much.
No, I have no AB 1234 received.
Thank you very much. We do have one item for closed session, so I'd ask the General Counsel to now take us into closed session.
We will now adjourn into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2.
If there are members of the public or staff on the Zoom call, please leave now.
We have emerged from closed session with nothing to report.
Great, thank you very much. There being no further business for the Board of Directors, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all very much.